You're really here because you've contributed to this incredible building that people have wanted for so many years. And we show another building, it's an arc, it's the arc. So that circle, that's Arlington Memorial Bridge, as you know, it's sort of the most important one, a very important structure. And at the end of it, you have a circle that was built 150 years ago, nobody knows really when. And in fact, they put a couple of columns on each side. So you have 2 columns on one side, 2 columns on the other. But yet, in the middle, just a circle. And everyone that passes it said, something was supposed to be built there, that's true. But a thing called the Civil War interfered. And so we have versions of it, sizes of it, and it's going to be really beautiful. I think it's going to be fantastic. There's a rendering of what it will look like. You have 3 sizes. That would be the largest one. This is just a model of what it would look like in either of the 3, any of the 3 sizes, which is right here. I don't know if you can see it. So that's Lady Liberty. Lady, did you ever hear of Lady Liberty?
You know, we think about, God is a God of love. And we know that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shouldn't perish but should have everlasting life. We know that God loves. But did you know that God also hates? Do you know that God also is a God of war? And many people don't want to think about that or forget that.
So I want to thank you all for sharing in this first Christmas worship service here at the Pentagon.
Lady Liberty. I think I've heard of Lady Liberty. It sounds kind of familiar. Where have I seen that before? I don't know. I can't quite place it though. Lady Liberty. Yeah.
Triumphal Ark. We're building an ark like the Arc de Triomphe. It will be like the one in Paris, but to be honest with you, it blows it away. Blows it away in every way.
Welcome to 2026, everybody. Certainly gotten off to a exciting start. Getting rid of all the drugs coming into America. That'll be nice. All those narco-terrorists. Can you believe people say it's about oil? People mad at ICE. All they're trying to do is get rid of the immigrants, man. Yeah, there's been so much stuff going on that somehow I didn't even hear about this Victory Arch or Memorial Arch or whatever kind of arch. I love how Trump calls it an arc. Like, the French pronunciation. The Ark. We got an Ark. But that was announced back in October of last year, and I just heard about it the other day, and I was like, of course. Because, just in case there was any Masonic Roman symbolism still missing in Washington, D.C., then this ought to fix that. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. It seems like a handful of people that I talked to about it hadn't heard of it either, so it kind of slipped under the radar with, all the other stuff going on. As well as the first annual Pentagon Christmas worship service, which was pretty amazing. That happened in December, obviously. And Franklin Graham, it was actually a pretty boring message overall. But add it to the list of blasphemous spectacles that you never imagined you would see. I saw some CBN report where they were glorifying and how that the gospel was being preached at the Pentagon. Like, what do you even say at a certain point? A Victory Arch. It's another one of those things that once you start to look into the history, Trump talks about how DC is the only major city that doesn't have one. And yeah, they're all over the world. Obviously, they harken back to Rome. It's one of the most iconic Roman things you could possibly build. But it's really interesting looking into the history and things like there's the Washington Square Arch in Greenwich Village, New York City, which was built in the 1800s and with a full Masonic procession and a Masonic cornerstone ceremony where they used the George Washington Bible, which is under the care of St. John's Lodge Number 1, which is like the oldest Masonic lodge in America. Yeah, the George Washington Bible has been used in all kinds of swearing in of a bunch of presidents and the cornerstone ceremonies for a bunch of buildings. The George Washington Bible is the main Masonic artifact, I guess. But the architect behind the arch in Washington Square was also kind of an interesting character, this Stanford White. He was shot and killed by the husband of this woman. Reading about him, he was kind of the Epstein of his time. He was really into young girls and apparently very predatory, and it all came out in this murder trial because he got shot by this guy. That's other rich dude. This famous architect, he embodied the American Renaissance, where they used all this kind of Romanesque style architecture in the 1800s, which is kind of what Trump is wanting to do. And it's just amazing how you look at something like this and you go, how much more blatant could it be? Not just an arch, but, Lady Liberty on top. Which, as I've talked about in videos in the past, is this goddess personification of libertas that goes all the way back to Rome, and before that, it's basically just another iteration. Columbia, the goddess Columbia, it's the queen of heaven, it's she who sits upon the many waters. It's interesting that, the Statue of Liberty, Columbia, she has the 7 rays emanating from her crown. She sits on the 7 continents, on the seven seas. It's so in your face, and it's been in our face our whole stinking lives. And yet, when you look at things like this Venezuela raid, it's amazing to see how many people will just go from scoffing at the idea that it doesn't have to do with stopping the drug trade. And, they can't ever really make up their mind whether it's cocaine or fentanyl, as dumb as that is, either one. But honestly, I'm having a hard time really believing just the whole story about how they went in and grabbed him before he was able to shut the door of the safe room. I think they jumped the shark a little bit with that one. Because I'm trying to understand, how that really supposedly played out. Because they went in and, dropped bombs and blew up a bunch of installations, and there was, over 100 planes, but... So you're not exactly using stealth, to slip in under cover of darkness and sneak into his bedroom while nobody noticed. They had to return fire, but then the guy didn't have time to get into his... It's like they were trying to close the door. What did they do? Stick their foot in there right before it latched? I mean, there's something really off about this whole story. But of course, the whole thing is FAFO. He FA'd and he FO'd. And it's pretty weird when you look at the mannerisms and just... He doesn't seem to be acting like somebody who was traumatically torn from his home in the middle of the night by a bunch of special forces guys at gunpoint. He seems pretty chill, pretty happy. Happy New Year. So I don't know if they cut a deal or if he's just kind of part of the whole act. That's very possible. So yeah, there's something about this raid that just seems like theater to me. And of course, everyone's debating, how is this even legal? I think that's the point, that it's not. It's the message of gunboat diplomacy, and several people have sent me this picture of this map. Was this 1940 this was made? Of the Technate by the Technocracy, I guess it was a party of the movement, the Technocracy movement. There was an official movement in the 30s and 40s. It's interesting how that kind of aligns with all the buzz about acquiring Greenland or whatever and creating basically the North American Union. But I didn't realize that there was actually maps showing this North American bloc, technocracy bloc, that actually included the northern part of South America, which would be Venezuela, obviously. So that's interesting. It's also interesting that Maduro, he had some opinions about Gaza.
Bloqueo total, invasión de Gaza. Ahí en un pequeño espacio viven millones de seres humanos que ya tienen décadas siendo bombardeados, torturados, atacados, perseguidos, martirizados. Ese es el pueblo sagrado de Gaza. Y el mundo tiene que reaccionar y decir no al genocidio contra el pueblo de Gaza, no al genocidio contra el pueblo palestino. El mundo cristiano, musulmano, judaico, el mundo del sur tiene que reaccionar. Tenemos que despertar y detener el anuncio de este genocidio que se hace contra el pueblo de Gaza.
People are speculating if that kind of rhetoric might have anything to do with his ouster. I mean, the whole thing is just so... In some ways, it's like I've seen this movie before. This is what's crazy. For those of us who've lived through Iraq and Afghanistan insanity and seen this pattern of justifying foreign intervention and the toppling of regimes for whatever, pretext the government gives you, only to find out, oh yeah, it was all a lie. But yet, nevertheless, there are people... I mean, when you think of the timing of all of this, on the heels of the Charlie Kirk, quote-unquote, assassination, whatever was, and again, that could be staged, it could be... But it was definitely, it's a psyop, one way or the other, that's still ongoing. So many people are fixated on the Eric Kirk stuff and Candace Owens and all the stuff, which I'm not trying to even get into all that, but just seeing that the psyop was on the conservatives, and now you got this civil war going on with all the influencers, and it's all about Israel, and it's Israel controlling America, and I talked about that in my last video. Trying to kind of help add some nuance, perhaps, or some perspective, some much-needed discernment, as best as I can. Trying to avoid getting sucked into the dialectic. The dialectic of, on the one hand, yeah, everything is about the quote-unquote Jews or the Zionists. And then on the other hand, you have the people who, refuse to even look at anything to do with Zionism or dispensationalism. The Christian Zionism part, they're both, I think, detrimental in their own way. I mentioned a few videos ago, I was kind of rambling about what's been going on with the guys on the No Agenda podcast. The past year in 2025, it started to get really kind of confusing at times, and I was starting to really wonder what was going on with their take on geopolitics and their refusal to kind of really even acknowledge that there was anything criminal going on in Gaza. It just started to get very awkward listening to them, and yeah, going off about the North Sea nexus. I mentioned this, and so this past week, I found out why that is, and it all kind of makes sense now, and I've been really grappling with how much should I even bother talking about or saying. I have a whole bunch of clips and everything, because I kind of went on my little rabbit trail. Listen, basically, I found out that, yes, Adam Curry, who I talked about in a video a couple years ago, and I was all excited about his getting baptized and finding Jesus and telling people on the Joe Rogan show, and I was recommending the podcast. I've been listening to this podcast twice a week for like 5 years. Pretty much every episode. So that's a lot of hours of listening to these two guys, and so it's been a painful realization, because they mentioned last week, he kind of had a little spat with Dvorak, and they were talking about, you did this bit on your other podcast with Pastor Jimmy, and I was like, wait, what? Other podcast with Pastor Jimmy? What is this? And so, I've been kind of starting to wonder, because I've listened long enough to know that, like, yes, he's been going to this church in Fredericksburg, the Bridge Church. I know about Pastor Jimmy. If you listen to his podcast that he did with his wife, which I think they've paused because he's doing this other one now, Curry and the Keeper, and he would always talk about his buddy. He's really tight with this pastor in Fredericksburg, who's both his pastor, and so now they're doing a podcast together called We Get to Do This. Okay. And I listened to the one from the end of 2025 called The Israel Conundrum, and it was like, oh, wow.
He is the law. He fulfills the law, just like the Old Testament was the law. And then when Jesus dies on the cross, the veil is torn inside the temple. And within a generation, the temple itself is destroyed. There's always talk about the temple. Mm-hmm. The temple itself is destroyed because Jesus becomes the new temple. There's no need for a temple. There's no need for animal sacrifices. Mm-hmm. He becomes the sacrifice. Mm-hmm. So in the Old Testament, they're sacrificing animals. They talk about the red heifer. They're trying to do that. Mm-hmm. God gives us a more perfect sacrifice. He offers up himself. Mm-hmm. And so this is where a lot of the Protestants say, well, we need to support Israel because the Bible says those who bless Israel will be blessed. But Israel,
they're talking about the family.
They're talking about that's in the book of Genesis. Mm-hmm. And the book of Genesis is talking about what is Israel in the Old Testament and the first covenant that God makes with the Jewish people. Mm-hmm. When Jesus comes, just like everything else, Israel's transformed. Yes. The laws changed, the priesthood has changed, the temple has changed, and Israel changes. What was the family and the race becomes the body of Christ. He says there is neither Jew nor Gentile. The new Israel is the Christians. We're the new Israel. If you believe in Christ, you're now the chosen people. You enter into the covenant with God. You're grafted onto that tree. And so that's a theological difference that we call supersessionist has with these dispensationalist Christians.
Yeah, because I always hear Republicans saying they are God-chosen people.
Right.
That's not necessarily true.
Not anymore, no.
So I've heard my favorite pastor tell me replacement theology, which is what this is a lie from the pit of hell.
It is.
And let me tell you, brother, I am seeing young pastors going away from dispensationalism, moving towards this. Just do a search and try to find who's talking for or against dispensationalism. This is a big, big topic. And I think that it's probably even really difficult to even discuss from the pulpit because it's so deep.
It is.
And so you've heard, this is my presentation, is all of this that we're seeing in the media against Israel and Jews comes from this. And the Schofield Bible is kind of used as the bridge.
Wow. How much time do we have?
I think we just need to do what we need to do here.
No, I want to keep it simple because you can get into a very convoluted conversation. Here's the thing. When we went to Israel back in 2005, we had a Jewish, Messianic Jewish guy who had served in the army there. He'd made Aliyah. He was American by birth, but Jewish. And he was our tour guide. Brilliant, brilliant individual. And he reminded me that we as Christians, followers of Jesus, have been grafted into the vine. The vine doesn't change. I've been around. I was actually down in Mexico doing grafting. I know what grafting is. I know how it works. And was able to participate and actually do some of that with macadamia nut trees and different things.
Actual grafting.
Actual
grafting
one branch onto
another.
When you graft a branch onto a tree, the essence of the tree doesn't change. It never changes. It's just now you've got a different branch. You've got a new branch that produces a different kind of fruit or nut or whatever it's doing. And when the scripture reminds us in the book of Romans that we've been grafted into the original vine, it's not to do away with the original vine. The graft doesn't take over the tree.
Which you literally heard Fuentes say, like, now we're new. We're the new tree.
And we've been grafted. So he said two different things.
He did.
And yet made them the same, and it's not. I could shoot holes all through that.
I know
that
you
little
can.
bit.
And I think it was hearing that clip right there. Replacement theology is straight out of the pit of hell. That has been the comment that I have not been able to get out of my mind or not been able to let it go or whatever. I listened. There's so much in there in this episode that was just like, oh, it was painful. It was painful to realize that, like, and it's hard to explain to people who maybe haven't listened to No Agenda or don't quite understand, like, why this is so disappointing. It's because this isn't just another dude who, like, grew up in the church or went to seminary and was taught this their whole life. And, you know, they're just indoctrinated with Christian Zionism or dispensationalism. This is a guy who's a brand new Christian, but who had been commenting on war propaganda, psychological, psyops, deconstructing the media for 17, 18 years, talking all about the spooks and what's the narrative. And, he's a 9/11 truther. He's a moon landing denier. There have been even times where I was like, is he questioning whether the earth is even a globe? I know there's been people who've brought it up to him. He's just joked about it. But yeah, this is not your typical normie podcaster dude. And, whether he actually invented podcasting or, to me, that's whatever. His impact on the world of alternative media has been substantial. And so the amount of reach, and so, yeah, I was excited for him to be able to, be used by the Lord to share the gospel, but also in a way where, okay, we're not just pretending like, the conspiracies are all a bunch of nonsense, the way that the church has basically been gatekeeping for, the American establishment in so many ways. So it's weird, like, this whole revelation has been, it's almost sort of metaphorical. It feels like a real punch in the gut, I'm not gonna lie. Because, yeah, the gatekeeping, you have this pastor who himself says he was woke. He talks about his story of being woken up during COVID. The irony. Because, yeah, during COVID, that was kind of when I started listening to No Agenda, because what they do in many ways is a very valuable service in terms of listening to all the different, the mainstream propaganda and finding the relevant clips so that, you don't have to spend hours every week, listening to all this garbage to know, like, what is the propaganda, particularly during COVID. It was like, yeah, what are my friends and family, because, when you don't listen to it anymore because it's propaganda, it was very valuable in going like, okay, what are my friends and family? What are they absorbing and what are they blind? I would hear the clips on No Agenda and then hear it like verbatim coming out of family members, without, they don't even know that they're regurgitating, media talking points. So I love these guys. I love Adam Curry. And so it's a bit tongue in cheek to be like, yeah, my Podfather. But seeing him now taking a position where, okay, now, because it's like, okay, you're a Christian now. You can't, when it comes to Gaza and Zionism and Israel, you are no longer in a position to where you can just come at it the way the world does in political terms. There's a theological underpinning, a debate that is really at the core of it all. And you need to understand this. You need to know about, I was like, he's got to know about the whole Schofield Bible thing. And so, yeah, he attempts to debunk all that in this podcast episode by playing clips of Ian Carroll and Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes. It was this nauseating compilation of straw man arguments. And yeah, most of these people who are Catholic, by the way, either Catholic or Ian Carroll doesn't profess to be a Christian. Tucker Carlson is, yeah, like we all know that they're all intelligence assets, I would say, or suspect in their own way. I mean, Nick Fuentes was at January 6th telling people to go into the Capitol, and somehow that doesn't matter to a lot of people who otherwise, when it's Ray Epps, it's damning, but not when it's Fuentes. But then he plays this clip of Nick Fuentes describing the difference between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant and how the New Covenant replaces the Old Covenant. And then to call that a lie from the pit of hell was like, it was just one of multiple instances in Pastor Jimmy's attempt to refute replacement theology that I thought was incredibly revealing about the contradictions. You're just not even being truthful. Overall, the whole thing is kind of this interesting case study because he never actually defines what Israel is. Even though Adam Curry, rightly so, says like, this is the main question. This is the thing that we need to explain and define is like, okay, Pastor Jimmy, who is Israel according to the Bible?
Can we break this down to help people understand what Israel is in Genesis 12 and today?
So that is okay. So that's a huge question. So I did a little.
This is why everybody is all over the map with that.
People are losing their minds.
That's the crux, man. That's a big part of it.
So here's a short answer. The Bible calls believers to love God's purpose, honors covenant faithfulness, pray for peace, and stand against anti-Semitism. I mean, it's clear throughout both Old and New. Paul, if you read through 9, 10, 11, 12, in Romans, you'll see God's heart is still for Israel.
And he talks around it, and he basically avoids the question. And it's so sad, but overall, this is only the tip of the iceberg, because then I listened to a few more podcast episodes and a couple of sermons from their, YouTube channel, and it's like, yeah, he's a straight up Christian nationalist. He's like defending the Seven Mountains Mandate and Lance Wallnau, and I mean, I think it's a charismatic type of church. And you wouldn't even be able to necessarily pick any of this stuff out just by going to the church's website, or on the surface level, it just looks like another evangelical, typical whatever church. But no, dude, he's all connected. He knows all. He was talking about conference with all these pastors who all knew Charlie Kirk, or they're all connected to like TPUSA. He's all up in it. He's all up in this whole world. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is. Hey.
Right now, there's an ideological war that Israel's losing. So they need the evangelicals, they need the Zionists to fight an ideological war.
And so, if nothing else, I was like, being that I did promote No Agenda in the past, and am now just kind of coming to this realization of like, okay, this is the direction that he has now gone. Because he looks to Pastor Jimmy like, okay, you're the pastor, and this is the irony, is that like, you're doing exactly the thing that during COVID we were all pushing back against, when it was like, no, trust the experts, trust the science. Who do you think you are? You can't do your own research. What do you know about medicine? You don't know. I am the science. All the memes, all the things that we all lived through. And it was like, yeah, the people who were just under the spell of the ones who were telling you that it was safe and effective, you couldn't reason with them. It was the mass formation psychosis. All the things from COVID are now being kind of repeated since October 7th in the world of dispensationalism, in the world of, the Schofield Bible-trained pastors and seminaries and theologians who, Zionism is like they're safe and effective. It's their dogma that they've been so entrenched in for so many years, and they've been injecting their congregations with it, just like all the pediatricians who for years. What COVID did was it, on a scale that had never before occurred, it exposed the whole racket to such a wide swath of people, at various points along the way, that it's like, that whole thing will never be the same. And so Zionism is kind of going through a similar thing. Christian Zionism, dispensationalism. This is what I was realizing, okay? Because of Gaza. Not because they hate Jews, and not because Jews are synonymous with Zionists. And that's one of the first things I started hearing on No Agenda over, 6 months ago, where it's like, when you're conflating Zionists with all Jews everywhere, you are already not accurately reporting on the reality of the world. And so it's like, oh, no wonder. This is why he doesn't like Dave Smith, and this is why he doesn't like. But it's like, if you had just been honest about it, if you had just come out and said, no, this is why you're talking about like, oh, we're not audience captured. And I remember, I was saying like a couple weeks ago, it's almost like QAnon now. It's like a new form of a QAnon message where you're just constantly you're trying to kind of defend Donald Trump in a roundabout way. But on this other podcast, it's not even subtle. So it's like, why don't you just own your worldview and own your position instead of kind of hinting at it? Because it comes out, and it's amazing how it's just affected not just like your take on reporting on the Middle East, but on like literally everything. Because now, like with the Venezuela thing, like with everything else, somehow, some way, the Zionism topic just seeps into everything. And as I was explaining in my last video, I think that's largely by design. And, and this is not a new concept. I was even reading on like henrymacau.com that, this is from December 30th, 2025. He's just straight up saying that the Illuminati is planning another Jewish Holocaust. And he points out how Holocaust, means a burnt offering. And he's quoting from this book by William R. Pearl. And, Pearl was a lawyer in Vienna in the 30s who helped organize illegals transits to Palestine for revisionist Zionists. And so he's basically explaining how the Jews are being, where's the quote? As the New World Order becomes more onerous and the position of Americans more perilous, the Illuminati, i.e. the Kabbalists, Freemasons, may be happy to use ordinary Jews as their scapegoats once again. After all, we never hear about Freemasons, and Zionists did it before. So, in conclusion, the Holocaust was used to trick Jews into establishing Israel. It also gave Jews a moral impunity where some think they have a right to kill non-Jews. Right? Louis B. Marshall, counsel to bankers Kuhn Loeb, which represented the Rothschilds, said in a letter, September 26, 1918, Zionism is but an incident of a far-reaching plan. It is merely a convenient peg on which to hang a powerful weapon. That, quote, far-reaching plan is the New World Order. And so I was like, yeah, that's a good way of basically trying to summarize kind of the point that I think I'm increasingly convinced of. It's kind of like when people get all focused on leftism or, wokeness, and they think that wokeness is the end-all be-all of the ills of society. That's a real evil. It's a real movement of Satan, ultimately, but is it the grand picture is leftism? No. The broader agenda of Mystery Babylon is so much bigger than just the lefties, the liberal, the libtards, whatever. And so that's kind of how I see Zionism in many ways. And of course, it is spiritual, and that is why it really does come back to the gospel. And that is why when I hear Christian pastors, it's like I truly feel like he doesn't even know what he's saying by saying replacement theology straight out of the pit of hell. And, ironically, it's like, man, the saying that I've heard so many times by Curry on No Agenda, what je zegt ben je zelf, met je kop door de helft, which is this Dutchism, this Dutch saying of what you say you are yourself, was like painfully clear. The irony of it all. Because, yes, who is the one guilty of the replacement theology? You've replaced the gospel and the kingdom of heaven with your American exceptionalism. And you're accusing all these other people of trying to be so crafty. When you're the one being crafty and dishonest by saying, oh, well, we're just called to pray for Israel. And the whole question of like, well, does that include supporting, their expulsion of Gazans from Gaza? Does that include their right to the land at all costs? I mean, the idea that you can pretend that you don't understand what Zionism really teaches, it's just inexcusable at this point. When non-Christians understand the situation, they understand the theology even better than we do. It's just a sad state of affairs, and ultimately I do see it as being part of this grander strategy of, this is a counter-reformation move that is generations in the making in terms of, you hear it in this Nick Fuentes clip where he's saying a lot of Protestants, quote unquote, people are associating Protestantism with Zionism. Even though, yes, did this dispensationalist theology exist before Darby and the Plymouth Brethren? Because they scoff at this whole idea of like, oh, the Schofield, like it's just this made up conspiracy theory. But okay, do you ever take the time to explain where or who was teaching dispensationalism prior to Darby in the 1800s? No. So how is, it's straw men. And of course, point to every time somebody, tries to make a connection to the Rothschilds or to the Jews, as if that's like how you debunk it. It's kind of absurd, but ultimately, what just struck me is that you're revealing what the core theological confusion and error is by saying that the Old Covenant and the New Covenant work together, and the idea that one is replacing the other is the satanic lie. Well, they do work together because the old is replaced by the new, and all you have to do is go to Hebrews chapter 8. And really, the whole book of Hebrews elaborates on this point, but I'm not going to read the whole book of Hebrews today. Though I probably should sometime. Now, the point of what we were saying is this. We have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, a minister in the holy places in the true tent that the Lord set up, not man. For every high priest is appointed to offer gifts and sacrifices, thus it is necessary for this priest also to have something to offer. Now, if he were on earth, he would not be a priest at all, since there are priests who offer gifts according to the law. They serve as a copy and a shadow of the heavenly things. For when Moses was about to erect the tent, he was instructed by God, saying, "See that you make everything according to the pattern that was shown you on the mountain. But as it is, Christ has obtained a ministry that is as much more excellent than the old as the covenant he mediates is better, since it is enacted on better promises. For if that first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no occasion to look for a second. For he finds fault with them when he says, and now he's quoting the prophets, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will establish a new covenant with the house of Israel." The new covenant is established with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Not like the covenant I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, for they did not continue in my covenant, and so I showed no concern for them, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my laws into their minds and write them on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall not teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will be merciful toward their iniquities, and I will remember their sins no more. And speaking of a new covenant, he made the first one obsolete. And what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. Furthermore, this attempt to explain the passage in Romans about being grafted into the vine and the vine doesn't change. Yeah, that's true, but who is the vine? Dispensationalism is teaching that the vine is Judaism, whereas when we turn to John chapter 15, what did Jesus say? I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit he takes away, and every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Already you are clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide. He's talking to his apostles, right? Or all Jews in the first century sense, and that's a whole nother topic. Because what is Judaism today? Christian Zionism, dispensationalism thrives on the ignorance that modern Judaism is synonymous with first century Jewishness, and that is absolutely not true either. Not that it even matters, because even in the first century, you had the Pharisees, who Jesus rebuked as a synagogue of Satan, and adding to the law with their oral law, which is what Rabbinic Judaism is. We now have 2,000 years of quote-unquote oral law, i.e. the Talmud and the Mishnah and, the Zohar and thousands of books, really. Countless editions of rabbinic commentary and rabbinic debate, all adding to the law, all debating the law, redefining the law, having rejected the vine. Jesus is the vine, and of course, I guess, unless you want to argue that what Paul is talking about in Romans and what Jesus is talking, because Paul, he calls it an olive tree, and Jesus calls it a vine. I guess unless you want to argue that those are talking about totally different things. Do you see how absurd this is? How blasphemous this is? This is the gospel. You want to talk about logic. If we've been grafted into Israel, and you're defining Israel as national Israel, as ethnic Israel, do I qualify to apply for an Israeli passport because I'm saved? No, they don't believe that. It's like, is it spiritual or is it carnal? Circumcision of the flesh or circumcision of the spirit? But you want it to be both and. Because nowhere in the New Testament do you find Paul or any of the other apostles or Jesus arguing that, Jews, they don't need to accept Christ. They can just cling to the temple and cling to the law and cling to their tradition and cling to their lineage and cling to their... They don't need Christ. They don't need the vine. They can exist on their own. Because he made a separate promise with them because of their bloodline, or because of their culture, or because of their grasp of the Hebrew language. And then at some point in the future, there'll be some final generation of Jews that will all come to faith in Christ en masse after we've been... Of course, they don't talk about any of that. And that's what is so misleading. It's like you want to accuse all these other people of twisting the word of God. I've never heard a Christian Zionist try and evangelize a Jew by summarizing the entirety of the dispensationalist narrative of you should move to the Middle East, you should move to the Holy Land, so we can rebuild the third temple, and you can falsely start making animal sacrifices again, and then the Antichrist will rise up and he'll make a covenant, he'll break his covenant, and then there'll be Armageddon and in the the valley of Megiddo, and after all of that, then you'll come to find Christ. But can we preach Christ just right here, right now, today. It's so convoluted and crazy when you really step back and look at what they're teaching. Zionism teaches that, yeah, they're basically going to be holocausted again before this final all Israel will be saved moment, where this final generation will supposedly come to find Christ after he intercedes before their military destruction. But in the meantime, and this is the kicker, right? This is where it all kind of clicks when you understand that why does American Christianity have such an affinity for this bizarre eschatological paradigm is because, indeed, Christian nationalism, it goes hand in hand with this. Because for the Jew, they have their fortress, their safe haven, their divinely ordained refuge of national Israel with the IDF and taking possession of the land. Then America is that for the Gentiles. That's really what it boils down to. And I read, months ago, I found that sermon by Ezra Stiles, who was the Yale president, shortly after the Revolutionary War. I mean, he was just saying it like so bluntly, it was mind-blowing, right? Basically, that America is the Zion, the carnal Zion, the false, the republic, the utopia, the promised land for the Gentile. And it kind of represents that on a worldwide scale, too, I think. That's sort of the idolatry of Colombia, the idolatry of America, is dominionism. And that's why, whether it's the Seven Mountains Mandate version of the NAR and all the Trumpites, or it's Catholicism with papal authority, where he has the symbol of, the papacy, where it's the two keys. One represents his spiritual authority, one represents his temporal. He's a king, he's an emperor. It's dominionism, it's government, it's church and state together. So that's why, if you're going to believe in any principle of America, the separation of church and state was, in its original inception, a very core Protestant ethic, I believe, where they were trying to create something that hadn't existed in Europe. But of course, I believe that this was all Masonic, which is ultimately a branch of Jesuitism, and it's all one big octopus. It's all one big satanic deep state. And so to hear these guys, knowing all that you know, having seen all that you have seen, in the name of America, in the name of Christianity, and these two things blending themselves together in a way that we've never even seen in our life. Even George W. Bush didn't come close to this level of blasphemous heresy from the White House.
The future of American warfare is here, and it's spelled AI. As technologies advance, so do our adversaries. But here at the War Department, we are not sitting idly by. Under the leadership of President Trump, America will lead the charge on this technological transformation by revolutionizing the way we win. And that's why today we are unleashing GenAI.mil. This platform puts the world's most powerful frontier AI models, starting with Google Gemini, directly into the hands of every American warrior. At the click of a button, AI models on GenAI can be utilized to conduct deep research, format documents, and even analyze video or imagery at unprecedented speed. Building on the great work of Undersecretary Emil Michael and his team, we will continue to aggressively field the world's best technology to make our fighting force more lethal than ever before. And all of it is American-made. The possibilities with AI are endless. Now, let's get to work.
And all these guys, it's pretty mind-blowing. Where you're just going to double down and embrace Donald Trump as God's instrument. The golden age of AI, is that part of God's plan? There's a whole lot of things you're conveniently ignoring. It really is it's copium. It's, I don't know how else to see it, it's emblematic of, what I see in so many different people these days, where they basically are just in denial that we are in the days that we are in. That we are at the stage of prophecy. Because dispensationalism at its core has always been hey, we're not going to go through it. We're not going to have to suffer. The pre-trib rapture is, if that's your blessed hope, you're not going to tolerate anyone coming to you and telling you that your blessed hope is eternity and the resurrection and eternal salvation. It's not the promise that you aren't going to go through persecution or trial in this life. That's a uniquely American perspective. We're not going to have to go through what so many other generations of Christians went through already. But now, now it's on a scale where we have technology in place that was never at the disposal of despots and emperors and inquisitors and dictators, communists, if they had what has come out of Silicon Valley now, when you think about all the millions of people that have been killed just without any of the tech that we have now, without any of the drones, without any of the surveillance. And it's like, we got to be positive, and we want to be encouraging, and this is doomer talk. No, it's not doomer talk. It's just real talk. It's like there's no going back to sleep. People want to go back to sleep and be like, it was COVID just the left? Was COVID just the North Sea nexus? I mean, get real. The irony of we can go in the middle of the night and take out the president of a foreign socialist country in his jammies because he's a narco-terrorist. And, Anthony Fauci's still walking around free. Francis Collins still singing his little folk songs. How many billions of people, billions of lives? Operation Warp Speed. Does that sound familiar? That's all ancient history, I guess. So over this world. I'm so over the idolatry of America. I'm so over hearing the gospel being mixed with Platonic delusions of a republic. The kingdom of heaven being confused with the concept of an earthly empire. Prosperity. It's just the prosperity gospel. Dominionism. Your best life now. Who's using who? Yeah. Does it make any difference whether America's controlling Israel or Israel's controlling America if tens of thousands of women and children being starved and systematically eradicated in a giant concentration camp? Is the blood on our hands? Is it on our tax dollars? Is it a lot of those people who are Christians, by the way? And maybe not most of them, but we don't care about the Arabs. Do Arab lives matter to Jesus still? What was that thing Jesus said? The parable of the Good Samaritan? Who is my neighbor? That's so sick. This is the real replacement theology. There's so many versions of it down through the centuries, but you open the book of Revelation and there's the woman with the 12 stars on her head and the moon under her feet. There's the true bride, and there's the whore. The impostor. I sit as a queen, I will never mourn, heaping up for herself luxuries, drinking of this cup of abominations, which all the nations of the earth get drunk off of. Come out of her, my people. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, happens in your heart. It doesn't happen by taking over the government. The whole history of Israel is basically reiterating that reality over and over and over again through every stage of its history. That it doesn't come through institutionalizing, doesn't come from the outside in. It comes from being reborn of the Spirit on an individual level. And when millions of people eventually come to find Christ, it affects culture, but that's not our goal. That is not our drive. That is not our commission to take the 7 mountains of influence, to save America, to save the West. We're here to save souls. We offer a hope that has nothing to do with whether you live in America or under the canopy of the Constitution. Your rights don't come from that. Your worth doesn't come from that. Your authority doesn't come from that. It comes from being created in the image of God and being loved so much that he sent his only Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life, both for the Jew and for the Gentile. One gospel, one word, one body, one hope, one salvation for all mankind. Today. Dispensationalism is a lie from the pit of hell. If you love Jewish people, you will offer them Jesus, because nothing else will save them. That's what Paul preached. That's what the apostles preached. That's what Jesus came and died for. An eternal inheritance that will not fade. Not the Greater Israel Project, Not the Trump Gaza Riviera plan, not Manhattan, not Washington, D.C., not all these monuments of stone and marble that are all going to crumble and turn to dust, melt in the heat of his judgment. That will all come to nothing. The Vatican will be turned to dust. All the great cities, fallen is Babylon the Great. It has been decreed. It is thus. Don't put your hope in Babylon.
But they also included therein, in the Constitution, the C's of the Bill of Rights undoing, setting at Article 6 of the Constitution as follows. This Constitution, the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made, under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, treaties included. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, including treaties. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary, notwithstanding. Simply stated, for those who haven't studied law, that very artfully worded clause in the U.S. Constitution makes the U.S. Constitution and its Bill of Rights subject and subservient to foreign treaties. Quote, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary, notwithstanding. Binding the judges of every state and every county to enforcing such foreign treaties in every state and county. The very type of UN treaties that Bill Gates and his World Health Organization, in concert with the infamous and nefarious Rockefeller Foundation, used to trample the Bill of Rights and implement global fascism, to implement COVID lockdowns, local land use restrictions, water restrictions, climate change restrictions, hate speech restrictions, and the list goes on. For several decades now, since World War II, the American Empire, that being the nation of America itself, combined with its NATO allies, other conquered territories around the globe, has not only been by far the richest and mightiest force on earth, with over 800 military bases in foreign nations, and 11 active aircraft carrier strike groups that can rain down hell and fire and brimstone to exert America's force anywhere in the world. But it has also been the biggest bully and greatest force of evil in this world. Starting wars, invading nations whenever, wherever it wanted to, such as Korea, Vietnam, Grenada, Iraq Wars 1 and 2, Panama, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and now Venezuela, little Nigeria. Typically, all of these wars based on made-up, concocted pretexts, such as alleging weapons of mass destruction that don't exist, or drug wars, or war on terror, incited by the 9/11/01 attacks on the World Trade Center and Pentagon, that were proven to be an inside job enabled by the true terrorists in Washington, D.C. Launched as a pretext not only to invade Afghanistan and Iraq to steal their resources, their oil, but also to implement Patriot Acts 1 and 2 here at home, to further destroy the Bill of Rights, set up TSA checkpoints at airports, facial recognition cameras at every street corner, abrogate Fourth Amendment freedom from unreasonable search and seizure, jail American citizens without a formal charge, without the right to confront their witnesses or evidence against them. That's all in the Patriot Acts. Or even worse, under provisions that continue in force under the National Defense Authorization Act to allow the secret military arrest, unlimited detention, torture, and execution of American citizens with no access to trial by jury or due process of law, as took place in multiple cases at Guantanamo Bay during the so-called War on Terror. In and through all this, America has indeed boasted of its invincibility and said to the world, you have to deal with me. Just as John said here in verse 7, she has glorified herself and lived deliciously and said in her heart, I sit as a queen and am no widow and shall see no sorrow. But therefore, we read here in Revelation 18 verse 8, shall her place come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire. For strong is the Lord who judges her.